Have you ever wondered what it's like to bite into a cloud filled with a savoury filling? Well, Vietnamese steamed pork buns, also known as Bánh Bao, a fluffy bao dough wrapped around perfectly seasoned pork with small surprises in there like quail eggs and Chinese sausage that make every bite an adventure. This is a tasty street food tour through Asia where we'll be cooking up some of the best street eats from my new cookbook. This is a book about street food. And our last stop is Vietnam for some Vietnamese steamed pork buns. These buns can be found any time of the day, whether it's a morning market for breakfast, a roadside stall, or a night market. It's a tasty snack or a meal. I'm going to make this really easy for you and break it down into 3 parts: the bun dough, the pork filling, and the little surprises inside. So the first thing to work on is the bao dough, and it needs to be proved twice, which means resting. So we're going to start it at the start of the recipe, and the first thing to do is to activate the yeast. So I have with me some warm milk and warm water. Not too hot, not too cold. The yeast just needs a little bit of warmth to help it dissolve and activate. So we have both milk and water here for a bit of richness. So we're going to combine the two. To that, we're going to add some caster sugar, or white sugar is also fine. We're going to mix that into the wet mixture, making sure it's dissolved. And then finally, we also have the yeast, which we're just going to mix in as well. So you can see there, the yeast is kind of floating to the top of the liquid. I'm just trying my best to mix it in, but it just needs a little bit of time to dissolve and activate. Right now you can see the little granules of yeast in there. So in the next 5 to 10 minutes, it'll start to fluff up and become nice and foamy. So the next step is to mix that into our flour. So I'm using a bun flour, and bun flour is essentially a lighter flour. So we don't want a flour that's quite coarse or heavy. So I'm going to add that straight in. So bun flour you can find at most Asian supermarkets, but if you don't have that, what you could do is also use a cake flour, which is basically a mix of plain flour and starch or cornstarch. I'm going to also add in a pinch of salt, and I'm going to mix this in with the spoon. So I'm going to teach you how to do this by hand, but if you do have a stand mixer with the dough hook attached, you can put it all in at once and just let it do its thing. But it's really easy to do by hand as well, so I'm just going to do that. So I first ate this dish back at home in Perth, and I picked it up at a local Asian supermarket where they sell them wrapped in cling wrap just sitting on the side of the counter. And I wanted to recreate this at home and make it easy for you guys at home as well. So now I'm bringing the dough together. I'm combining the wet mixture into the dry, and what you can see there is it's quite crumbly, so it doesn't look like it's not too wet or it's not too dry. I'm going to turn this onto the bench in a second, and we're going to knead to bring it together. Okay, that looks good. Okay. So when I'm kneading, I like to use the palm of my hands, that surface area there, and using the force of my arms, so pushing away and rolling the dough back onto itself. Just find it helps cover most surface area, and you can really work the dough quite easily that way. So we're going to knead this for about 5 minutes so that it's well combined. We do want that yeast mixture to kind of keep doing its thing, and we're going to heat it up a little bit with the warmth of our hands. So here's a little tip: any dough that's stuck in your hands, I just like to rub my hands together to get any excess dough off. So it comes off quite easily, and then what I'm going to do is work the dough back into it so we're not wasting anything. So it's feeling just the tiniest bit wet and sticking to my hands. So I'm just going to dust the tiniest bit of flour on there. And it does depend on where you are. So if it's quite humid, you might need a bit of extra flour. If it's quite dry, you might need a bit of extra water or milk. What you're looking for is a nice soft dough that's not dry and crumbly, and nothing that's too wet so it's not sticking to your hands. Look at that, I can even read my emails while kneading. It's like a workout. So that dough feels right, it's nice and smooth, and everything is well incorporated. So for our first prove, I'm going to put the dough back into the bowl. We're going to cover it with the tea towel, set it aside at room temperature to rest for about 30 minutes to rise slightly. It really depends on the temperature and weather of where you are. So if it's dry and cold, it's going to take a lot longer to prove. So here's my little tip. So I'm going to cover it with a lightly damp towel. I'm going to place this into the oven at about 27 degrees and let it rest for about half an hour. So whilst the dough's resting, we're going to work on the pork mince, the filling for the buns. So for the filling, I have some fresh pork mince that is quite coarse and quite fatty. Fatty means it's going to be juicier. We've got a coarser mince, which means it's not going to crumble when we bite into it. Okay, so the mince goes straight into the bowl. We're going to add to that some finely chopped red onion and the white parts of the spring onion to the pork mince for some natural sweetness and fragrance. So I'm just chopping the onion. I like to slice down like this, not all the way to the end, just to keep the onion intact. Then slicing down to create a fine chop. Okay, that goes in. Let's chop up some of the white part of the spring onion as well. So about 2 stalks in total. That goes in next. Okay, a bit of a different one here. I have fried shallots, and I know they're usually added to dishes for their texture as well as their flavor. So not so much for texture here, but the flavor. So it's going to add a nice, rich, sweet, oniony taste to this filling. Okay, so next up, for some earthiness and texture, I also have some black fungus. So this is what it looks like. You can find this at most Asian supermarkets. It's quite dry. As you can hear, it's hard as well, so you can't slice into that. So all you have to do is boil some water. You can boil it in the kettle, pour that water onto the black fungus and let it soften over time. It's also going to expand, so it looks like this after you've done that. But if you don't have this on hand or can't source it, any mushroom will do as well. Okay, so we're going to chop this up now. Okay, just finally chopping that. So black fungus goes in. And to season, oyster sauce goes in next. So it's savory, sweet, salty. This is going to add lots of flavor as well. Fish sauce, very common Vietnamese ingredient. This is going to add a nice umami, savory taste, as well as some saltiness. Some ground white pepper. And some salt and sugar, because this is all about balancing flavor. And a little bit of caster sugar as well to balance out all that savory richness in there. Okay, next step is to mix, and I'm actually going to go straight in with my hands to combine this. You can use a spoon if you'd like, but I like to feel the mixture and make sure everything is well combined. A little bit like making meatballs. You can actually put your hands in there, combine all of the fillings together. All right, that looks good. So I would say season to taste, but you can't actually taste this because it's raw. So what you can do is fry off a little bit of the filling, taste it, and then go from there. So you can add a bit more fish sauce, a bit more sugar, balance it out until you're happy with the taste. Okay, that looks good. I'm going to set that aside. Then we're going to form the pork bowls that's going to be filled inside that fluffy bao dough. So for the small surprises inside our Vietnamese steamed pork buns, I have quail eggs and Chinese sausage. So you can see here, it almost looks like salami, but essentially it's a cured Chinese style sausage that's quite sweet, fragrant, and really tasty. So I'm slicing them diagonally, just like that. All right, to pre-form the pork bowls, I'm gonna work with about a generous tablespoon of filling. Just gonna cup that in my hand. And in the center there, we're gonna place a quail egg and a slice of Chinese sausage. I'm pressing that in and wrapping the pork mince around, pressing quite firmly. And that is our filling for the Vietnamese steamed pork bun. Placing that onto the plate, and I'm repeating the process to make some more. So if you can't get your hands on quail eggs, what you can do is work with a normal chicken egg and boil that, and then slice it to make it smaller. Okay, so let's pull out our dough and let's see how that's going. I'm just going to set this all aside. Wash my hands. All right, let's form our pork buns. And using a bit of flour to dust the surface. I am going to pull the dough out like that. So what I'm doing to shape the buns is I'm going to roll this into a log shape. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I have about 7 buns to make. I'm just going to slice them into thin discs or smaller portions to wrap our buns with. So making small indentations. Okay, so they're going to be quite big. I like big buns. You can make small buns, but I like big buns. Once we have our portion of dough ready to go, I have my rolling pin also ready to go and my pre-made pork balls ready to go. We also need to prepare some parchment paper or baking paper just to line the bottom so it doesn't stick in the steamer basket. So I have some baking paper here which I've pre-folded. So I'm just cutting along the edges to form square bits of paper to line our buns with. Now this is to stop them from sticking in the steamer basket when they cook afterwards. It also stops the bottoms from becoming soggy. You don't want soggy buns. There we go. All right, let's form these buns. How many times can you say buns? Buns. Working with one piece of dough at a time, we're gonna flatten it with the palm of our hand, rolling it out with a rolling pin. Doesn't have to be perfectly round. What I'm going to do next is put the pork ball into the piece of dough and we're going to stretch and wrap that dough around the bowl and pinch at the top to seal. We're bringing the pastry up the top from all edges, stretching, stretching, stretching. With all those edges at the top, we're pressing, pinching to seal to enclose that pork filling, and there you go. That's your Vietnamese steamed pork bun, ready to go. I'm going to place that onto a piece of parchment paper and we're going to set that aside to prove for a second time. I quite like making buns, steamed buns. It's quite fun. And don't worry too much if the dough seems a little thin. It will rise and expand as it starts to rest to create that fluffy outcome afterwards. Okay, last two. I actually made these for my family one Christmas. Just thought I'd break tradition and make some Vietnamese steamed pork buns instead. And now it is the new tradition that I make these every Christmas because everyone loves them so much. It's almost like a little present at Christmas. You get little surprises in there. Okay, last one. All right. There we go. So I'm going to place my tea towel on top very gently, let that rest for a second time so they rise before we steam them. All right, let's set these off to the side, and whilst they're resting, I'm just going to clear up my bench space. Okay, so I've tidied up, the buns have rested for a second time and risen, and now it's time to cook. So I have my steamer on medium heat. So it's best to steam these on a medium heat to let them gently cook through. We don't want a rapid steam. So we're going to put the buns straight in. Now I'm just making sure there's enough room around them to allow for them to expand. Lid on, we're going to let that cook for about 10 to 15 minutes on about medium to high heat. It might be tempting to put them all in there, but I'm just making sure I have a bit of room for them to expand because as they cook, they're going to rise up and become nice and fluffy. Let it do its thing. Wow, they look great. All right, let's try them. Okay, 1, 2. Okay, they look super fluffy and ready to eat. Okay, let's give it a taste. I'm gonna bite straight into it. Look at that. What I love about Vietnamese steamed pork buns is that they're a complete meal themselves. You've got the juicy pork filling, the surprises in there, the quail egg, the Chinese sausage, all wrapped in that fluffy, sweet, steamed pork bun dough. Whether you're having it as a quick breakfast, a ready-to-eat snack, or a light meal, what I love so much about Banh Bao is that it makes me so happy with the comforting flavors and textures in there. So unfortunately, this is the end of my tasty street food tour through Asia. But you can find this tasty recipe and many more in my new street food cookbook, which is out now. Make sure to grab your copy with the link in the description. So subscribe to keep learning how to make more tasty, easy recipes at home. You don't want soggy buns. You don't want soggy buns. Buns. Steam buns. Buns. All right.